Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. Yes, folks, 108 Stitches Baseball Talk. My name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Madmouth, along with my co-host David Levin, and a guy who's one of my favorite people. Of course, it doesn't hurt that he was at my alma mater, Coach Eddie Cardieri, who had a great run at coaching USF baseball. And Coach, glad to have you back on the broadcast.
Hey, Scott, it's great to be with you guys always. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, since I tipped my hand about my alma mater, here we are on an all-baseball show. Why don't you talk about your experience over coaching USF baseball?
Well, I would start by saying I was so blessed by being hired at such a young age to be Robin Roberts' assistant at USF. So here I am in 1983, and I'm a Hall of Famer's assistant coach, and we roomed together on the road. The budget wasn't great. It wasn't like he was used to in the major leagues by any means, but we just had so much fun together, and I learned so much from that man, and that started my career at USF, the 3 years as his assistant coach, and then he turned it over to me in 1986, and he became the head coach at USF at that time.
So talk about some of the things that you're most proud of that you accomplished over at USF.
Well, we had numerous conference championships, numerous regional appearances. I think we had 9 or 10 NCAA regional appearances and came a game away from Omaha on a couple of different occasions. But, it's all about the players, and I look back and I still have we just moved from Tampa to St. Pete, so our garage is a man cave, and I have all kinds of stuff, awards and plaques and stuff and pictures and letters from players and so forth. And that's what's meaningful to me is the relationships with the players while I was coaching them, and then after all these years have gone by to see, exactly what they turned out or how they turned out to be.
So tell me, who do you feel were some of the best players that you coached?
Well, I would answer that by starting with Scott Heeman, who was such a great catcher. We signed him, he came in 84 as a freshman, and he played 2 years under Robin with me as an assistant. Greatest catcher I've ever seen in college baseball, period. End of discussion. Not even close. He's the greatest. And Robin Roberts said at the time that Scott was the best catcher he had ever seen besides Johnny Bench and Randy Hundley. And that's a pretty strong statement there. And that gives you an idea of just how good Scott was. You don't see catchers that run 6'6", 60s like Scott that could hit with power, and his throwing arm was off the charts. So I would start by saying he's probably the best, but along the lines, we had Ross Glode, who spent 8.2 years, I think, in the major leagues. Chris Heinz, and they were on the same club. Jason Dolero, and he was on the same team. And JD was a first-round draft pick, Chicago White Sox, I think 11 or 12 overall. But, in the span of 24 years, 7 months that I was there, it's just a very long list of great players that I was blessed to coach. And, out of that 24/7, 21 was as the head coach. But 24/7 was a lot of great players.
If I remember right, didn't Scott Heeman get drafted by the Oakland A's?
He did. Scott, it's funny because I remember getting phone calls from the Pittsburgh Pirates. They had the number 1 pick, and they wanted video of Scott Heeman. And back then it was so hard to get any, you'd have like 8-track tapes or something. I don't even know what we had.
Yeah.
And we had to send them up to Pittsburgh, and they were going to take Scott number 1, and for some reason they didn't, and they took Jeff King, who was a shortstop, and Jeff King played a long time. But Scott slid to like number 11. And then when he got with the A's, by the time he worked his way up, he was on the Bash Brothers teams with McGuire and Canseco and Steinbeck, but the problem was he was stuck behind Steinbeck in terms of catching.
Right.
And so Tony La Russa used him in more of a utility role where he would catch a game a week and play second base and maybe even play the outfield or whatever. And then he got traded later on. But Scott he had a great career, and he was on a lot of those Bash Brother championship teams.
No kidding. Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I remember the Bash Brothers. The Bash Brothers probably didn't like what happened to them with the LA Dodgers. It'll be for another day. But Scott was definitely a player that I certainly remember. And the slide to number 11 to the Oakland A's, to me, was an incredible find for the other residents of the Bay Area. So, so any other thing else you want to talk about your USF career and your coaching career in general?
Well, it seems like just ages ago, but, I just give thanks to the Lord for blessing me, and I give thanks to my assistant coaches. I had such great assistant coaches. Mike Trapasso, my pitching coach, is now he's been the head coach at University of Hawaii for the last 15 years. And several other guys are in scouting and still in college coaching and stuff, and I'm just proud of all those guys. But the players, the players what makes that whole business, if you ask me.
All right, David, go ahead. You got a bunch of questions you want to ask Coach Cardieri?
Okay, sure. Coach, first of all, great. Thank you for being on tonight. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak with you, especially about baseball. We start off a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the minor league system. From what we have been reading, there's going to be 42 teams that will be retracted from minor league baseball as part of the Major League Baseball funnel system. What kind of effect do you think that's going to have on these players once this does happen, and how will they be able to recoup the loss of being with a team? How do you think that's going to filter out as far as their careers?
Right. Well, that's a really tough issue, David, because I feel bad for the owners of those minor league teams. In many instances, they're family-owned teams, and it was a business for that family. And whether it was just a short season A for June, July, and August, or whether it was a full season Class A or Double A team or whatever, they brought people out to the ballpark. In certain towns where there may not be a lot to do, those minor league teams were what there was to do in those towns. You know what I mean? And
right.
I did a short stint. I did a summer in the New York Penn League, and I remember all those small towns like Oneonta, Elmira, Jamestown, and all that. Minor league baseball, it's what was happening in that town during the summer. A friend of mine, Wade Boggs, played for the Elmira Red Sox.
Right.
And, when guys like that come through and play in those towns, and then those towns see those players go on to major league careers, it's a great thing. And I feel bad for ownership. I feel bad for players. And I think from the purely baseball standpoint, I don't know this. I'm not that smart. But these analytics must be playing a part in that, where teams think they can save money on minor league clubs because they're using analytics so much to evaluate players, rather than the good old-fashioned way of going out and scouting players over the course of a minor league season, if that makes sense.
It does. Let me take this a step further then, because like we had talked about before the show began, I'm here in Jacksonville, and one of the minor league teams is for the Marlins, the Double-A affiliate here, the Jumbo Shrimp. They're not affected by this. But small teams like Batavia on the East Coast is affected. Clinton, Iowa, which has been there for a while, who has jumped different leagues, is affected. These are players at a very young age, for the most part. It's a starter league or it's a low Class A team. Do you see there being more independent teams that may come out of this, where they're not necessarily affiliated with a major league team like the Yankees and Red Sox, the Marlins, or whoever else, but they're still independent and they'll be able to survive on their own?
Well, I think you've hit on something there, David, because I managed one summer, and it's been almost 10 years now, in Macon, Georgia, and we played at the field where Hank Aaron played, Chipper Jones played minor league baseball there and all that. There was an independent league, and those players, I've never seen, I can't say never. Those players played so hard, and all they wanted was a chance to sign a pro contract. That's all they wanted. And since that time, I understand independent leagues have become more heavily scouted. And there's been a few major league players, and in fact, a few that have become stars that came out of independent leagues. So you might be onto something. If they cut 42 minor league teams, then maybe some people are going to, take a shot on starting an independent team.
Well, Coach, now that you brought that up, back in my hometown of Metro Detroit, they actually have an independent league out in the Rochester Hills area. So, and it's a very popular league too. So, I think both of you guys are on to something there. Like they say, well, let's have a little fun with the analogy, okay? If they build it, they will come. Well, if the prospects are good, they'll get picked up. We'll take it to even college football for a moment. I don't care if you're in Division II or Division I. If you can play, that's why you have the combine there. That's why you have the All-Star games. They're going to find you no matter what level you play at. So continue on, David.
Okay. You actually kind of stole my thunder there a little bit.
Well, I should point out, too.
We think alike now.
Yeah, exactly. I should point out that contraction is something that is a hard decision when you eliminate teams. And to me, I think they tried to do it many years ago with Major League Baseball, but the Players Association had none of it. So just thought I'd throw that in there. All right, Dave, continue, please.
Sure. Coach, since from what I understand in reading and asking questions about the proposal for the baseball season this year with the 80 to 82 games, where they're going to come through with a different proposal of where they're going to play and how it's going to be done, there is a real strong possibility that minor league baseball is not going to happen this year. And because of that, there's going to be a 30-man active roster of players to play in the majors and what they would basically call a 20-man taxi squad. How effective do you think that's going to be? And do you also think it means that players who are on the minor league roster maybe make their major league debut sooner than they may have anticipated?
Yeah, well, it's uncharted waters, and it's something that, we've never been through before. And it's whatever happens with the major league season, I know the players want to play, the fans want to see them play, but the fans may not be able to see them play live. And there's going to need to be a big asterisk by this season, because no matter how this season turns out, it's not going to be like the real deal of 162. You know what I mean? It's
right.
It's just a different thing, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. If there's a taxi squad of 20 guys and players are maybe not in the shape they would normally be in, and there's some injuries and guys get called up and make debuts, all that could happen. It's just they haven't yet put the finishing touches on what's going to happen with the season, but I know they're looking at a bunch of options.
Can I step aside from the major leagues for a second and talk about college baseball? Because part of what's going on here is affecting spring sports in general, baseball and softball and everything that's going on. And it's not just here in the state of Florida. It's the landscape of college sports. Baseball took a major hit when they decided that there wasn't going to be any season this year, especially for those players who are playing in their last year. And it's devastating. And they've worked so hard, and what happens? For those players that are eligible for the draft, how are they preparing for the next phase of their career since they didn't have that last season to showcase their talent?
Well, the players that were good enough and draft eligible, they're going to be fine in terms of if they're drafted high enough, then they can have the option to sign a pro contract. The other guys, I think they've been granted another year of eligibility. So that's really good. But college baseball I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. Let's say you're University of Florida, and some of those clubs, Florida got off to a great start. I think they were 16-1. They lost a one-run game to Florida State there at the end. Those teams really just had a great season to look forward to, and aspirations of Omaha and all that, and they'll never realize that. And then the other side of it is there's probably coaches across the country that might have been in some hot water in terms of how they were doing over the past several years, and all of a sudden they might not have gotten off to a good start, and the season ends, and now I'm guessing the athletic director is not in a position to make a change because of the way everything, worked out. So that part of it's hard. I was also thinking about the scholarships. NCAA with the rules of 11.7 scholarships divvied up and 35-man rosters, and I'm not really up to date. I got to say that. I'm not up to speed on all the rules, but my point is, how do you make those calculations where you're getting guys back next year that you didn't expect to have back next year, but you spent scholarship money on incoming freshmen, and you have a roster cap, and is the NCAA working with college baseball to figure that part out? I'm not privy to it all.
That was part of my next question, because like every other sport, there's a recruiting aspect to it, there's a marketing aspect to it, there's a financial aspect to it. So not only are these kids, these players, these students, athletes who have been working so hard, their dreams are crushed. The schools themselves are taking a major hit too, in trying to keep things the way that they are for the season, but they're also planning ahead, and you can't necessarily go out and recruit and do the things that you would normally do. I'm assuming that's a major strain on them as well.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. And, when you look at the whole business of college baseball, it has grown. It's gotten so much bigger over the past 10 years, let's just say. But think about it. The institutions rely on income from, let's say the Final Four in basketball. I mean, right. The conferences get a lot of money. I mean, the SEC schools, I don't know what it is anymore, $25 million a year from TV contracts or whatever. So obviously all that's affected, and the spring sports probably really get affected, but, so doesn't basketball and football.
I would think. I'm sorry, go ahead, Scott.
That's right. Let me chime in on a couple things here. Okay, first of all, Coach, I like the point that you went ahead and made about some of the other coaches that potentially could have been on hot seat. As it turns out, they got a reprieve, didn't they, because of COVID-19?
Right. Yeah, I mean, in certain cases, that's probably true.
Yeah. And then on top of that, David alluded to the fact that, some players retain eligibility. But how does that affect a lot of the newer scholarships? Now you have extra players who retain eligibility, and then you're offering newer scholarships. There's a little gray area there that I've often wondered about.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the tough juggling act that these college coaches are going to be faced with. I mean, they didn't expect to have this three seniors coming back next year, and they're on partial scholarships, and they've already given those scholarships away to incoming freshmen, and then they wait and see how the draft is, and those incoming freshmen don't get drafted or don't get drafted as high as they thought. So now, hey, Coach, I'll be there come August when school starts, if it does. And what do you do? I mean, what do you do? So there has to be some give and take, I would think, from the NCAA and within institutions and their budgets somehow to account for those types of things.
Okay, David, go ahead.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Coach. I know that they just announced this past week that the Major League Baseball draft has been limited to 5 rounds, which is virtually unheard of, because we know that there are players, that are drafted in around 39, 40 who somehow make it to the majors and live the dream, and there's stories written about it, like Mike Piazza and other players who have historic careers. How is that? I know that it's going to be a frenzy where you're only having so many players drafted, and then there's going to be a state of, I guess you'll call it free agency. Do you think that's better for the players, where maybe they can pick and choose where they want to play?
Oh, what a debacle that could be. I mean, if it's restricted to 5 rounds, then there's hundreds of players that won't be drafted. And this gets back to what we were talking about earlier. So they committed, they signed a scholarship with a certain school. Now, what can that school, does that institution have any recourse to say, we're reneging on your scholarship because, you know, we have other guys and we have more seniors coming back than we thought? Then they sign a release and you are free to go, and then the second and third choices that player had come into play. And how is all that going to work? I mean, that's just confusing to me and still to be determined.
Because you've had a chance to sculpt and be a part of players' lives over the years, you know, you're coaching, you're teaching, you're mentoring, you know, these players who become grown men, grown women, you know, through the student athlete program. You know, they look around to you and to other coaches and whatnot. If you were in that situation where you had a player who was a senior and whatnot, what kind of advice would you give them, knowing that they had worked that hard and maybe they don't get drafted? What happens?
Well, you know, and I always had so much loyalty to my players. I mean, if you graduate or, you know, you finish your eligibility and you're not drafted, and I was one of those, and you're devastated. You know, you're devastated at that point in time, but you want to keep playing. And now these independent leagues do afford the opportunity for a guy to keep on playing. And as we discussed, they're heavily scouted now, these independent leagues are. Right. So otherwise, you know, I was fortunate. I hate to say the pronoun I, but I was very lucky that I knew after my knee surgery in my freshman year, even though I could play the rest of my career, I knew I wanted to be a coach. If I didn't make it to the big leagues as a player, I wanted to coach. So at a very early age, I identified that and talked to all the coaches, the head coaches of the teams we played, and handed out resumes and all that. And luckily, Jay Bergman gave me a shot at University of Florida once I finished at Florida Southern. But, I mean, you know, for seniors, that's the avenue that they can take. Or, I mean, again, so many guys didn't continue with baseball but have had illustrious careers in other endeavors.
I'm beginning to think that maybe this becomes part, and I hate using this term, but it's what everybody uses, the new normal. That if they find some form of success where they are able to lower the rounds of the draft, let's say it's not, instead of it being 40, let's say it's 20. But then again, that's still 20 rounds, which means, you know, there's 600, 700 players that don't get drafted. It gives them an opportunity to become a free agent, and they can pick and choose. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, but it maybe gives them maybe they become hungrier, saying, okay, I'm drafted by the Tampa Bay Rays, or I'm drafted by the New York Yankees. This is the team I wanted to play for. I don't have to worry about, you know, going somewhere where I don't want to go. I work harder, and my dream is realized. And maybe there's a silver lining with that. I'm not sure, but I do know that it's gonna affect at least 600, 700, you know, college eligible players this season, which does concern me. Do you think that Major League Baseball is going to do whatever it can to protect the integrity of the draft in the future? I mean, this is an anomaly, I would think, right?
Well, no doubt. But I think the silver lining is, in my opinion, would be that it's the players that would be later round draft choices that are going to be in a very good position, because they're going to be able to go to a really good Division I or Division II school, whatever it is, and play their 4 years or 3 before they become drafted. I know one thing in recruiting, we used to tell players when we're recruiting a guy and they're juniors and seniors in high school and they're supposed to be drafted, and the players that are drafted in rounds 10, 15, 23, and so forth, they're going to be the ones in the top 5 rounds 3 years from now. I mean, right. that really worked, because they would go and They would go off to college and develop not only as players but as people. I mean, we were flying to all of our away trips, so that might not sound like a big deal, but an 18-year-old's learning how to pack a suitcase, fly, stay in a hotel room, and all the same things you would do in the minor leagues or even the major leagues. So it's all part of the education. So in my opinion, cutting the draft back to, less amount of rounds is advantageous for college baseball. Because there's going to be a bigger pool of players, of good players.
Like I said, I sure hope so, because college baseball today is definitely leaps and bounds farther than it was, back 5-10 years ago. The players are the athlete itself, bigger, stronger, faster, more talented, and hopefully that means that they're able to mature more and become better at their craft.
Let me point something out, too, that we haven't touched on yet,
please.
Coach. We're talking about college players, but you also have an international pool of players, too. We're not even counting that into the equation. So, teams are able to draft from an international pool in addition to colleges. So don't you think that makes it even more complicated? Because a lot of those international players would be playing in a lot of these clubs anyhow. I mean, think about it. You got international plus the draft itself. You got a lot of players affected by this.
That's a great point, Scott. I mean, the international scouting and so forth. And what is it? So players down there, once they turn 16, they can sign pro contracts.
Right.
And so that scouting, the Dominican and Puerto Rico and Venezuela and so forth, they're heavily scouted areas.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of those players are coming over here now and training with certain guys when they're 14 and 15. And then as soon as they turn 16, they're able to sign pro contracts. And they're typically the ones that aren't going to go to college.
Right. Well, don't lose sight of the fact, Coach, that a lot of teams have baseball academies down there either. You know what I mean? So they've got an investment in some of these young guys. Have you heard of a lot of those baseball academies down there, Coach?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's a lot of facilities being built down there now.
Oh, yeah.
Score International has a facility, and major league teams have facilities down there.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's a great system for getting international players.
All right, David, continue.
I think I was going to say, just piggyback on what you both said. I think part of the thing is, too, you're right. Once they turn 16, they can sign a pro contract. When I was 16, I couldn't shave. I'm wet behind the ears. I'm a junior in high school. I'm trying to decide whether I want to go to college and, whether I can drive a car. It's not like I'm playing baseball every day and trying to decide which major league team I'm going to sign with. There's a maturity factor to it, too, because you're making sure that these kids are taken care of. I mean, they're still kids, that they're provided for, that, you're basically teaching them to continue to walk before they run. So there's another aspect to that. So it's definitely affected, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's a great point. It just has to do with the maturity and, like you said, when I was 16, I just got my driver's license, I could barely parallel park a car, And I mean, they have advisors.
What are you talking about?
Well, Coach, I've got a better one. You ready for this? When I turned 16, Coach, and David, get this, I had to take a driver's test in the middle of a blizzard in Detroit or Southfield, Michigan, and this lady that was giving me the test, I said, listen, why don't you make it easy on me or I'm going to get us both killed and find an easy route. She gave me she let me practically pick the route out. I was driving my grandmother's yellow Cadillac, and that was the nicest drive I've ever had. Then again, when you're dealing with a blizzard in Michigan, she was adorable, but if she was going to remain adorable, she passes me, and we take it easy, and we're in good shape. I got my license, and there was no problem there. So since we're all talking about the 16-year-old stuff about driver's tests, you having a problem parallel parking, and me getting slammed by a blizzard, oh, my goodness, those 16-year-old driving stories. And, the irony of the whole that day is after I got so excited I was with my dad, I ran a red light that same day, but luckily never got caught.
I had to learn how to parallel park in a 74 Chevy boat, and it was my grandmother's car, and it was an 8-cylinder. and I could not parallel park, and he still passed me.
Well,
that guy, if he's still alive, God bless him.
Well, God bless that chick that passed me. I'll tell you, I never thought we'd get into talking about 16-year-olds being able to get their driver's license under the most unbelievable, ugly circumstances. Didn't mean to take you off course, guys, but, Coach, you really tipped me and got me going on that one. Thanks, Coach.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, don't apologize. I'm glad you did. Thanks, Coach. I want everybody out here, here on the South Florida Tribune Broadcasting Network and all of our associates to realize that passing a driver's test is one thing, but trying to do it in a blizzard is double the challenge. And I can thank Coach Eddie Cardieri on this network for allowing me to rehash that incredible, unbelievable, ugly, and white memory. Okay, continue, David.
I have this image in my head of you driving right now. Hang on a second. No, seriously.
Well, Candy has to use a tablet every time I drive, so don't worry about it.
Before I kick it back over to Scott. You're on the west coast of Florida, and baseball in the west coast of Florida and South Florida is two ways. Tampa Bay is a pretty good baseball team that, in regular circumstances, with 162 games, will be competitive and possibly playing in a World Series. The caveat to that is they play in one of the worst stadiums that there is in Major League Baseball. By contrast, the Miami Marlins are one of the worst teams in Major League Baseball, and they play in a pretty nice stadium. The law of averages is that for 80 games, maybe they level off. But how do you make baseball important again in the state of Florida? Because the fans just aren't coming out.
It's such a good question, and it's such a tough question. The Tampa Bay area, it's like, it's really great sports area, but they seem to support winners. I mean, everybody does, but I mean that when the Lightning, great hockey organization, they pack it every night. They packed it when they played in the Trop, in the Dome, what it was called then, when hockey first came to this area. People don't remember. They played in the Dome, where the Rays are now. And, they've become the Lightning, and they're so well supported. They're that niche of hockey fans in this area. The Bucks, when the Bucks are winning, and now that obviously what's happened with the quarterback situation with Tom Brady coming, you won't be able to get a ticket to that. And the Rays, it was always when they played the Yankees and the Red Sox, it was packed. But when they were in the pennant chase, those crowds were always good as well. So I don't know, what the magic thing about baseball is. I don't know if a new stadium would do it or not. I don't know. I personally have never had a problem going to the Trop and watching games. I guess it's because I'm spoiled and you're so comfortable in there, indoors with the AC or whatever. I remember going to Wrigley, watching a Cubs game. They were 21.5 out of first, and the umpire had his hand up, and he pointed to the pitcher, play, and the Cubs pitcher threw strike one, and the place erupted. Everybody went crazy, and they were 21.5 games out of first place. So, there's just certain baseball towns, I guess, that's where it is, and I think we're still kind of in the growing mode. But the Rays, to me, have done an absolutely phenomenal job bringing talent through that system. Kevin Cash has done a great job taking over for Joe Madden. And, I think the future's really, really bright for the Rays no matter where they play. Now,
Coach, I got to admit, I actually saw a hockey game, and I think it was called the Thunderdome at the time. So they definitely packed that joint for sure. So I did see it. It was a pretty neat experience over there. I never realized how good of a fan base Tampa was for hockey, but I know they've had their ups and downs for the most part. The Lightning are definitely a hot ticket in that town, and the Bucks will be, especially when things are going well. But I'm glad you brought up the hockey connection and the Thunderdome or Tropicana Field or whatever you want to call it.
Scott, if I could, I remember it vividly so well because I was a very young head coach at St. Leo College when a buddy of mine, Mark Ferguson, asked me to come over to this condemned literally condemned gas station. And he said, I just bought this place and I'm going to make it a sports bar. And when baseball comes here, everybody's going to hang out at this place before the game. And I said, I'm in. And I thought it was the greatest idea. And for one reason or another, we didn't get involved. But baseball did not come. Hockey did. And hockey broke single season and single game records when they first got here playing in the Thunderdome, as you said, Scott.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. You want to give Fergs a shout out, go ahead and do it, because I've been to Fergs many years ago. I had a great experience there. If you want to bring up Fergs, go ahead, and we'll make sure that we can find a way to get it to him, or at least tell him you're on a broadcast talking about it. So,
Ferg is a great guy to begin with, but he's expanded that place every which way. I mean, north on Central Avenue, south on Central Avenue, and back towards the Trop and up 3 stories. The place is just, I mean, during baseball season, it's the place to be prior to the game.
I believe that.
I feel a road trip coming on.
I know there's a road trip coming on. Go ahead, David. Continue.
Okay, last part, Coach, and then Scott, you can take the wheel. There's a proposal on the table that there's going to be 80 baseball games. We're going to get back from spring training in June. We're going to play baseball in July, and then games are going to mean something. We don't know what proposal they're going to use yet, whether it's the 3 division or we're going to play the spring training facilities or anything like that. There's also something on the table called the universal designated hitter. Do you think these changes that they're making right now to make baseball interesting is something that's going to stay? Or do you think we're going to go back to baseball the way it should be played? And I say that because I'm a purist. I don't believe in the designated hitter next year.
Well, notwithstanding the DH, I'm definitely a traditionalist as well. And I would think it would go back to how it used to be. And this season is going to be something we've never experienced. And Major League Baseball, the commissioner, and all the thinking heads are just trying to come up with a plan that's going to work the best it can work. And I mean, it's just not going to be great. I mean, I heard the one proposal where you play within your division the majority of your games, but then any interleague games are within, whether you're in the East or the Midwest or the West, So, I mean, they're just they're trying to come up with a plan that's going to salvage the season, if you will, and it's not going to be anything we're used to. Put an asterisk by it.
Okay. And I wanted to get your opinion on that because it could change tomorrow. We could wake up and we can see something in the news where, we're not going to do this. We're going to go back to, everybody's going to be in Arizona. Everybody's going to be in, or people are going to be in Florida, and then we're going to meet, and the records really won't count. It is as bizarre a thing that I've experienced. I'm 48 years old. I've been watching baseball since I was 4, and I don't think I've ever seen anything like this.
Right, and I don't think anybody has, and we'll just see how it shakes out when it's all said and done. And you got to hope that the virus and the government and all that works out to where they even allow that to happen. And,
right.
Half a season. We don't know that yet.
I appreciate it. Scott, you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm enjoying all this, listening to you two.
This is great.
Gives me more ideas, too. So let me go back from a marketing standpoint. I know David may have touched on it, but I want to go ahead and get in on this one, too. So I'll ask you the question the way I believe I need to ask it to get it across. How does the loss of spring sports on the college level hurt recruiting in the marketing area?
Well, it depends on which area it is, I suppose.
Right.
If an institution recruits a lot of local players, then it's going to impact, who comes out to see those players play. If you're in Baton Rouge, they don't care where the player comes from. They just love to support their baseball team. I'd be on here all night talking about a trip we made. I brought my coaches to LSU in 1996. And Skip Bertman, who had won, I think it was 4 national titles in the 90s, he rolled out the red carpet and taught our coaches how he runs his program. But my point is, certain locales, small college towns like maybe Oxford, Gainesville, Tallahassee, they're going to get their crowds. And, other places you might need to have more marketing and local exposure, if you will.
Okay. Now, I asked this when we on the Sports Exchange earlier. I know there's talk about this virus becoming an issue, about whether players will actually go ahead, and I'm talking ahead to 2021, whether nobody's unsure of it, would they be more inclined to stay home than go on the road? Do you think that that's something that could be affected here in baseball as well?
Yeah, again, unsolved mystery, things that we don't know how the future is going to work out when it comes to things like that. But you only have a choice of staying at home so many games. Some of those college baseball teams stay home unless it's time to go on the road for conference play. But others will have a home-and-home series against another great team from another area of the country, if you will. Some will play some games early in the season and work their way up to conference play. So, I don't know how it's going to impact traveling. I think it's going to be the same kind of for all of us. We're going to be more cautious and wipe our hands more often and all those good things. But, eventually we'll get back to normal, I pray.
Yeah, but do you think that players will be inclined to want to play for their hometown teams rather than travel to colleges outside of their state, especially considering some of them might be more high risk? I think that's probably one of the things I've always been curious about is, again, no state's exempt from danger, especially if they go back premature. But I'm talking 2021. If you're a player, looking ahead to 2021, do you think they would be more inclined to stay put rather than actually leave their home state and play in for another university outside of the state?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I would answer it by saying that I don't know the impact that the virus would have on that, but I know that one of our selling points at USF was to say that, the player, hey, your parents sat through all those cold nights at Little League games and high school games and all that. Why leave town and have them have a major expense on weekends to bus or fly or stay in a hotel and so forth when they can just drive 20 minutes and watch you play? But it was always that some players, that was meaningful to them. They wanted to stay home so their parents could see them and they could keep their relationships in town and so forth. Other players were like, nope, got to get away from home. And some of the parents were like, yeah, he needs to get away from home. So you just don't know. Some of them want to get away and some of them want to stay.
All right. Let me talk about the asterisk for a minute. I know that there's probably the one thing, the NCAA, I don't care what sport you're playing, but they don't hesitate to take titles away, at least in basketball, and wins away in football. But I don't know. Do you think it would be fair to place an asterisk on a team that won a championship anyways, even though they were extenuating circumstances? I don't really personally, and this is just my opinion, Coach, believe in putting an asterisk behind any championship at all. I really don't. Obviously, there'll be a footnote to it, but a champion in 2020 is the champion. They should get the rings, the trophies, and all that, and they should be credited with it. And there might have been other instances where you could, like, for example, the Houston Astros, but they didn't do it. But I'm not so sure me personally would go the asterisk route on the 2020 season. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, and I definitely, I can see that side to it. A championship is a championship, just like a win is a win is a win.
Right.
So, I get that. I understand that. The asterisk part of it is just the fact that it's a shortened season. It's just not the same. In fact, without fans in the stands and stuff like that. I remember proposing, let's have one game where we don't have any fans, we don't have any music, we don't have an announcer, and then, the sound, I'm sorry, you have fans, but no entertainment, no music, no announcer. and just the sound of the game, the players communicating and, the sound of the ball off the bat and all those things. I wanted to do that like one game a year. And here we are where we may see it way too many times than we want to imagine,
Well, we'll take it a step further if you want to go down that road. I remember many, many years ago when the Miami Dolphins took on the New York Jets on a Saturday afternoon. They had an announcerless football game, and the fans were watching, and all you had was a guy who was doing the, I believe it was actually Brian Gumbel that ended up your halftime host to try to get through it. Well, I give NBC credit for trying to do it. It never happened again. Nowadays, I'm sure they'd love to have sound being piped in there just to give it some form of some sort of experience. But I'm with you there. But again, you talk about the fan experience, and again, we talk about the NFL for a moment, Coach. They've had strikes and lockouts that have shortened the season, but yet I never saw an asterisk by those titles. So that's where I was kind of referring, where, extenuating circumstances are what they are. Hockey's the only one that ever canceled the season because of a lockout. And, of course, baseball lost the season, so no championship was crowned. So, the NFL never gave an asterisk, and they had a strike many years ago. And I would be hard-pressed to think that MLB would. But I guess, like you say, there's a compelling I hate to say debate is a better word than argument on both sides to look at it either way. So I'm glad we've touched on a lot of different topics. I think it's been great that our listeners will have an opportunity to take away a lot of elements that they can think about, because that's what our responsibility is to make sure that our listeners can benefit by what we're talking about and give them reasons to think and get something out of the broadcast. David, any other thing you want to ask before we let everybody promote what they stand for?
Actually not, but I will say that as we continue to discuss these things, and we really don't know how sports is going to play out, whether it's on the major league or professional or college levels. The most important thing is especially when we're talking about colleges, it's the college athletes that is really the most important piece of this puzzle. And I think at times, not saying that we do, but I think on the periphery, people tend to forget it's the player that's affected most. Not more so than the college or the university, because they can recruit that. It's important to make sure that these college athletes who have worked so hard are still being able to have a chance to realize their dream. And I think some people do lose sight of that at times.
Coach, I know you're retired, but I'm kind of curious, okay? And I know it's nothing more than just a mere hypothetical, but how would you have handled this situation if you were coaching now, even though you're probably thankful you don't have to?
Well, I probably would have struggled more than anybody because I'm not the most tech efficient guy, if you will. In fact, I consider myself pretty much a computer moron. But those guys are doing a lot of work from home on the computer and staying in touch with recruits and things like that. And those kinds of things kind of bore me personally, but they're a necessity now. So, the thing about college coaches, those guys they're great. They adapt. They can adjust. I mean, they went through it as players. They adjusted all the way through their playing careers, and whatever's in front of them, they'll get it done, and we'll get back to normalcy sometime.
So I have a feeling that Zoom and virtual meetings are something you're glad you don't have to deal with. Is that correct?
Amen, brother.
All right. Well, all right. Before we go off the air, okay, David, why don't you let everybody know who you work with? Coach, you'll have an opportunity, then I'll give you the gist of our network and what we're doing. All right? Lead off, David. And I guess that's an appropriate term since it's a baseball show, lead off. How many times you heard that term, lead off, Coach, in your lifetime?
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah.
I would prefer to back cleanup, but okay, I'll lead off.
You are leading off.
I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I work for Fansided.com. I cover the Miami Marlins on Marlin Maniac, and I cover the Jacksonville Jaguars on blackandteal.com. I can be reached on Twitter at DM719907.
All right, Coach, why don't you give everybody a little bit of a background about what you've done. We all know what you've done, but what you're doing now, and so that way people can go ahead and hopefully catch up on you. Sure, they'll look at your Wikipedia page and everything about you, and they'll be pretty darn impressed, to say the least. And now that I brought that up, let people know what your winning percentage was over at USF. I think this is off the charts.
Well, we'll start with that because I honestly don't know.
Well,
I don't know. We won almost 800 games. I know that much, but
good enough.
Right now I'm what I would call semi-retired, Scott. Even though you said retired, I really love real estate, and I do some real estate in the Tampa Bay area. My wife and I have just moved from Tampa after 30 years to my hometown of St. Petersburg. And so I'm delving in real estate at this time. And also, even though I promised I would never coach another travel ball team, because I've had several of them over the years, starting with 9-year-olds and taking them through till they got on the quote-unquote big field, I did accept a position to take the Florida Swarm. Everybody's probably familiar with the Midland Redskins. They're a real big travel ball outfit out of Cincinnati, and they've merged with a group in Tampa called the Swarm, and we were supposed to start practice right after Memorial Day. We'll see how that shakes out, and play a tournament, West Palm in June, Atlanta in July, and Nashville in August. So, again, that's on hold. We're waiting to see how that's going to play out. But in the meantime, we're just hanging here, hanging tight in beautiful St. Petersburg, Florida.
Well, I often wondered whether you would ever coach again. When I had you on before, it wasn't something that you wanted to do, but it sounds like there's been a little bit of a change of philosophy, isn't it, Coach?
Yep. Well, they came to me and presented this, and I was like, cool. So we actually had a tryout in January, and I saw these players. This team will be rising high school juniors, which is a huge recruiting year. So we should have, not the pick of the litter, but a lot of really good players will be on this team. And I thought that was going to be quite a challenge and one that would be a lot of fun to experience this summer. So, I accepted it.
I want you to tell the listeners the event that I came up for in Tampa. I can't remember the name of it, but I do know that you had some of the best coaches in the area, and I had a wonderful evening with all you guys. And, seeing Pop Cuesta, Carol Lombardi, of course, you, to name many others. I think John Crumley was there as well, right, if I remember right? And
yes, he was.
So,
yep.
So why don't you go ahead and reflect back on what that event was and let people know how strong of a baseball area Tampa is, because you had a lot of people reunited in that place. So go ahead. The floor is yours on that one.
Well, that meeting was called by the American Legion director, and he was trying to sell American Legion baseball. And again, being a traditionalist, American Legion is what we played when I was coming up, and it was so important. And by the way, David Jacksonville had great Legion baseball and still does to this day.
It still, I'm shaking my head. It still does. I mean, Scott and I have talked about for a while. Jacksonville was a boxing town because we had done another show about MMA and boxing. But Jacksonville itself has always been a baseball town. Long before the Jaguars were here, for a while it was a one-trick pony because it was the Gator Bowl and the Florida-Georgia game. But it's always been a baseball town. People flock to minor league teams and to Legion baseball and softball, all those things, because it's always been an institution.
Right, and Jacksonville's always been a hotbed for high school baseball talent.
Oh, yes.
Coming up, high draft picks, great college players and all that. Yeah, I mean, what can you say? That meeting that night, Scott, was about trying to revitalize, if you will, American Legion baseball and get these coaches to put teams in for the summer and play a competitive American Legion schedule, and then 2 tournaments in the summer, and those tournament winners and runners-up would compete in the state tournament, and the winner of the state tournament would go on to the regionals or sectionals, whatever they call it, And then the winners go on to the World Series. 8 teams would be in the American Legion World Series, televised by ESPN. And it kind of, what I'm gathering is it's fallen flat. And the reason is because of travel baseball. The coaches, players are all placed on summer league teams in travel ball. And I guess it was just too big of a hill to climb, if you will.
Well, that's too bad, because when I was up there, I was pretty upbeat about where it was going and having to be able to absorb what it was like, working, in the Tampa Bay area. I worked for the Tampa Tribune, as I've told you before. And, so nobody had an opportunity to observe baseball on that level that I did. I mean, that's where I met K.R. Lombardi. I was over at Chamberlain High School, Frank Permui, among others. So, so I lived it myself and saw a lot of great players. I think when John Gruden played for Chamberlain as well, didn't he?
Chamberlain High School, I believe you're right. Yeah. But I mean, so many. I mean, you can go to Tino Martinez, Fred McGriff, right, David Magadan. All those guys played the Legion. American Legion baseball back in the day was huge. Yeah. And like I say, it's sad. It's kind of fallen by the wayside.
All right, well, that's a little bit of Tampa baseball history. When we bring Pop Quest on, hopefully on the broadcast sometime, he'll probably give you a different perspective. We're glad that Coach Cardieri came on to discuss these topics. So with that said, let me give everybody some information how they can follow us and how they can listen to the broadcast. First of all, you can follow us at Twitter. My personal page is Scoop, SCOOP 33333. That's 5 of them, in case you want to count to 5. And my other Twitter account is at Tribune South. That's the main one. So do the @ at Tribune South. And now in hockey terms, we have a hat trick. So we'll lead off with Facebook. You can like our page on the South Florida Tribune on Facebook. Instagram, you guessed it, South Florida Tribune. YouTube channel, South Florida Tribune. Subscribe to it there. It's for free. And our website is www.southfloridatribune.com. Our email is southfloridatribune@gmail.com. And my LinkedIn is Scott Morgan Roth, which is actually where I met Coach Cardieri, or at least where we came in contact again. So as you can tell, Coach, we've certainly made a lot of progress on the social media side. The shows that we have on the network, the South Florida Tribune Broadcasting Network is the Sports Exchange, the South Florida Tribune Podcast, which is a non-sports related show. And you are listening to 108 Stitches Baseball Talk with myself, Dave Levin, and our special guest tonight is Coach Eddie Cardieri, who worked at my alma mater. I'm proud to call it my alma mater, University of South Florida. We have another broadcast called The Real and the Rare with Xavier McKnight, fantasy football with myself and Ryan Skolrud, and Motorman and Rude Dog. How do you get to listen to these broadcasts? I knew you'd ask, okay? We have Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, CastBox, Podcast Addict, Deezer, and Podchaser. Now, we can't guarantee we're always going to talk about our driving experiences at the age of 16, because we definitely brought it to the table. And I tell you, you guys brought up some great memories. Coach, when you always do that, it's always a good time anyhow. So, what can I tell you? I got to tell you, it's really neat when we have the opportunity to cover a lot of ground, especially at a time where the uncertainty of baseball is what it is. I should ask you on this note, though, Coach, if you were a betting man, and I'm not a betting man, do you think that there will actually be Major League Baseball season, knowing that I know that part of the complications here include a 50-50 revenue split, and a lot of players would prefer not to do it, because obviously money's a big factor in this, especially under some very unprecedented circumstances.
Yeah, just a tough one to call. The Major League Players Association and MLB and the commissioner, they're all going to have to come up with something, and my gut tells me, with everything being okay with the virus, that they're going to play some sort of season, but I don't know what it's going to look like.
Well, David and I talked about this on another broadcast a few weeks back. I know that we talked about potential possibility of Arizona and now Florida are both open, so I'm wondering whether any sensible idea would be to have all the teams play at their respective spring training facilities, especially knowing full well they know the area well. These two states are open for business, and they can certainly accommodate lodging because they've done it in spring training for a while. What do you think of those as possible ideas? I know they're talking about the home stadiums, but you're talking an 80-game season in spring training parks. It's still out there. Nothing's been finalized. But any closing thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, I know that's an option, and it's one that they're probably looking at. I don't know if those spring training parks can hold the crowds that would, demand in terms of supply and demand. I mean, can they hold that many people, and, how that's all going to shake out. And then the other thing is the weather consideration. Anything being played up north after a certain date is going to be very difficult. And so then maybe everything would have to be played more in southern states, if you will. So it's a decision I would not like to have to make as the commissioner or President Trump or anybody else involved in this. It's just it's a really, really tough road to hoe.
Well, especially in Florida, where if they don't have fans, I think it could be doable in Arizona. But I guess we'll leave that for another day. I was just curious to get your reaction that you have the two major states that accommodate spring training, whether it's doable there. But you know what? I guess this is such a question mark that at some point we'll look for that thing called a punctuation mark, called a period or an exclamation point. Shows you that we're incorporating English into the equation, since we've talked about it on many different levels tonight. So, but Coach, I've got to tell you, as always, it's been great to have you on the broadcast tonight. And I hope we look forward to having you on at a later date, Coach. So on behalf of Coach Eddie Cardieri and my co-host David Levin, my name is Scott Morganroth. Any last thoughts, Coach?
Nope. Great show, guys. Thank you very much for including me. Thank you.
Oh, it's been our pleasure, Coach. God bless and be safe and be healthy, and send my best to my friends out in Tampa when you talk to them. All right?
You got it.
All right, thanks. Have a good night, Coach.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.